Welcome back to the Noah Baumbach series. This is a series of podcasts dedicated to the work of writer-director Noah Baumbach, one of our favorite filmmakers. Today we're talking about two movies that are technically one and a half. We're talking about Mr. Jealousy and Highball. Now, if you go back through the IMDb of Noah Baumbach, you will see Highball is listed. When you investigate what Highball is, it's not so much a movie as much as it is an experiment. So we're going to save most of our conversation about that for the end. We're going to focus on Mr. Jealousy, but we have to talk about both of them together because what I realized in the middle of recording our last Noah Baumbach podcast was I want this series to be more about the career of a filmmaker, how his career progressed from Kicking and Screaming all the way to Marriage Story. Because if you look at both of those films, it's like a complete day and night difference. It's two totally different filmmakers. Kicking and Screaming, Mr. Jealousy, and Highball, if you look at those three films, that really marks early Baumbach, because after that, he sort of sheds a certain idea that he had of himself as a filmmaker and does something completely different with his next movie and going forward. So those are the things I really want to talk about. So let's jump into Mr. Jealousy. Mr. Jealousy, for those of you who haven't seen it, is, I would say, a cerebral-ish comedy, still full of like slapstick humor as well. It's similar to Kicking and Screaming tonally. It's basically about this man named Lester, played by Eric Stoltz, who is an extremely jealous person. He starts dating this woman, Ramona, and immediately becomes fixated on all of her past lovers, and particularly this one by the name of Dashiell, who is this incredible world-famous writer, the voice of his generation, so to speak. And the plot from there thickens when he decides to follow Dashiell into a group therapy session. And then he involves himself in Dashiell's life. And so that sort of is what the plot is about. Overall, I really do enjoy this movie, but I've been talking for too long. So Jack, give me your overall thoughts on Mr. Jealousy.
Oh, let me tell you, as soon as I finished this movie, I was like, wow, I'm incredibly lukewarm on this. It's not bad. I don't think it's particularly good either. I will say, not to dive into the nuts and bolts of it all too much, I don't enjoy movies that overuse narration. I think it's kind of a lazy plot device to use. I thought all the performances in the film were really good. Just, it left me wanting more. It was a movie, and I found it to be rather forgettable, to be quite frank.
I like this movie more than I expected, honestly. The thing I can say that is the best part of this movie, and again, I didn't love it or anything, but I thought it was just all right. I like how it was kind of like a play. A lot of it kind of built up to this one moment, this one lie. It was kind of like farcical in the way that like Eric Stoltz's character Lester basically like lies throughout the whole movie because he's like neurotic about relationships. And I did like that aspect to it. And I thought Lester as a character, though not like no one should do this stuff, it was just interesting to see him. And I really like attached myself to just like his thought process. Cause like I've had feelings of Mr. Jealousy sometimes, but it is nice to see it like come full force. I don't think the movie sticks the landing fully, but I definitely enjoyed it. Like just about overall. And I think it's really his best shot movie at this point. Not the best shot movie we've seen. French's Haw is really well shot, but I was kind of impressed with how this was shot comparatively to Kicking and Screaming. And that's kind of what this is about, the evolution of a filmmaker. And I think he's getting it some more in this one. And, hats off to that.
Yeah, there's two things I really want to touch on there. The first is Noah Baumbach at this point in his career really fancied himself as a type of director. Like he thought of himself as a character. He thought of himself as like a Woody Allen, a Francois Truffaut. Like he thought of himself in line with some of these great filmmakers that came before him. And you can see him trying to emulate that in Kicking and Screaming and in Mr. Jealousy. I think it becomes more clear in this one than it was in Kicking and Screaming, because you can see a lot of the technical stuff, that pays homage to some of those movies. The use of the iris, a lot of fun zoom shots, sort of slow zoom in shots.
I mean, the opening is we won't talk about this director too much, but the opening is very similar to like Annie Hall, with just like the flashback and the narration and kind of like the origin story of this character you're going to see throughout the whole film.
Exactly. And then all of the technical stuff is very reminiscent of some of these filmmakers that he has been emulating, people that he has been worshiping for years. And I think that that's a mark of a young filmmaker. I think that that's certainly something that we can all say of ourselves as well. As, you know, you grow up watching these movies, and before you have your voice, you have their voice. And that's the only way you know how to make movies, is by using their language, you know, the master's language. And I think that that's why this movie isn't as good as it could be. The one thing I do really love about this movie more than anything else, and one thing I love about Noah Baumbach as a filmmaker, and one thing I love about all of his movies, is the main characters are people that you don't want to admit to yourself you resemble. They're characters that have really big flaws, usually emotional flaws, that you identify with, but you never want to accept in yourself.
Speak for yourself.
And speaking for
I ain't got no flaws. I'm goddamn perfect.
You're so right. And I do apologize.
You do look really good.
We've all obviously this is a farce, so it's taking this emotion to the next level, but like we've all felt that way before. We've all been exceptionally jealous, and it's completely neurotic and it's completely insane. Yet I still, at the end of the day, I'm like, I know this person. That really works. And I think there's a lot of humor in this movie that works. There's also some stuff that doesn't totally work, but let's start with these characters. I have one big question for you. I like Eric Stoltz a lot, but I don't think he totally pulls off the neurosis of somebody that would be that jealous. I think he kind of plays it a little bit too even keel throughout the movie. Someone that I think might have played it better is actually Chris Eigman. And so my question to you is, what happens if Eric Stoltz and Chris Eigman switch parts? Because I think that they might be better suited for each other's parts.
I could totally see that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think Eric Stoltz is very like reserved. Yeah, I think Chris Eigman would do a better job, and I think he could play it up a little bit more.
Yeah,
that's an interesting seed you plant in my head there.
Great farmer.
I will say, yeah, I didn't think of it till now, but that definitely does make sense, because there are moments where Chris Eigman is supposed to be like this cool writer guy who has made it as like Dashiell Frank, and you just like, there's some moments where you're like,
stupid ass name, by the way.
You're kind of like, he is like more neurotic, and I think Eric Stoltz, because again he's a big star from back then, and like, I mean, have you seen his jawline? Like, incredible. But I think
very handsome.
Yeah, I think
very solid jawline.
Very much play the suave Dashiell character that was written on the page, and then to contrast, I think Chris Eigman could be a little more neurotic, but that doesn't mean they do a horrible job. It just means like, I think there's just like a little miscasting there, and that's kind of like an interesting point, though, Dan. I definitely agree with that. I think that would do wonders for this film, honestly.
I kind of think so too. And that's not to discredit either of the performers for what they do in their parts, but I do think he would probably skew more towards the unlikable side of the character. And I think that might be a big issue. I think that's probably why Stoltz is Lester in this movie, is because he is a likable presence just as an actor. And I think he brings out a lot more of the kindness of Lester. But I think that does sort of sacrifice.
But this seems like it would be a character that would be unlikable. Someone who is highly and overly jealous. That to me would be like, if I knew someone like that, probably wouldn't like him very much.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. Before I continue, I got to shout out our man, Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert was really high on Kicking and Screaming, and I'm going to reference him for all of the Baumbach reviews, because I think that the way that he is charted Baumbach's career, the way that they've interacted is very interesting. So I have a quote here from Roger Ebert about Mr. Jealousy. He said, Noah Baumbach's new film, which, like his observant Kicking and Screaming, is about characters who are too old for college but unready for life. Mr. Jealousy isn't quite successful, but it does provide more evidence of Baumbach's talent. And I think that is illuminating. This movie on its own, in a vacuum, is okay, but it demonstrates his talent still. He's demonstrating an aptitude for the way that these kind of people talk, and that's, again, what really works about this movie. Where I think it goes wrong is it tries to stray too far from that. It goes in the complete opposite direction of Kicking and Screaming, goes more for like a plot-centric thing. And I think that plot it's never really been Noah Baumbach's thing. So let's talk about that plot just a little bit. The main conceit, I think, is clever, but it never fully lives up to the potential of Eric Stoltz going into Dashiell Frank's group therapy session, playing his friend Vince. Do you feel like there's sort of a missed opportunity with this? Because I think all the therapy scenes are a little bit like, again, even keel.
They're a little dry, I think. But I that idea itself, just on the surface, I think is a wildly funny idea. And Tyler said earlier, it felt like a play. That's totally something that I could see up on stage. I love that idea.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that there's no real build up to it. Like throughout the film, it just kind of scenes just kind of happen and it keeps going, and then all of a sudden it just like builds up to like the end. But there's no like, and I think the issue there is that it's mainly just Dashiell and Lester talking the whole time. There's no like third party in there that's like it never feels like an actual therapy session because it's only Dashiell and like Lester fighting, and like even the therapist like barely says anything throughout. Like if anything, the therapist is usually a punchline, but like I don't know. Yeah, there's just something like deeply missing about that part of the film.
It's pretty much dueling monologues at that point, and I do think that that's where the movie gets a little dry. Is in both of these movies, in Mr. Jealousy and Kicking and Screaming, and Highball as well, there's a lot of that sort of faux intellectualism that we talked about last time, and Kicking and Screaming is aware of it. This movie, I'm not totally sure if it's as aware of it. I think it's actually proposing more philosophical ideas as fact. And I think that's kind of why it comes off like a little dry, is it's just like they're talking about very big ideas, very big things. But you mentioned the therapist, Dr. Polk, played by Peter Bogdanovich, who is like one of the great entities in film history. I do think that this speaks to one of the fatal flaws of this movie, is how much it's indebted to the past, how much it's indebted to film history. And I think that that's why Peter Bogdanovich is even in this movie. As that character. I think that there's just so much, he's so indebted to the past that he's unable to really, this is corny, but he's unable to like really move his own career forward. He's like really stuck. It sounds like I'm dogging the movie, but I really do like this movie. We'll talk about some good stuff in a second.
I mean, I think that's the main problem of the film. Like I liked it more than I expected, but I think the main issue is that it just never feels like its own thing. But Baumbach is like coming from a place where it's just like he hasn't found his voice yet, but there's just some potential you can see. You know, he's like, in baseball terms, he's like batting like 240 or something, and you're like, oh, but like he gets a lot of walks, and he could build to something one day. But it's super interesting to like see this, and because Tarantino's first films were like Reservoir Dogs and like Pulp Fiction. It's like there. He did it. But like not everyone is like that. Some people like slowly build, and it's super interesting to see a director slowly build.
Now, enough dog in this movie. Let's talk about some stuff that we actually like. Because again, Tyler, just like you, I really like this movie. This was the second time I watched it. I found it much more enjoyable upon a second viewing than the first viewing. The first viewing, I was quite, I wouldn't say I was bored, but I was definitely losing interest at various points throughout the movie. This time I was a little bit more engaged. I actually paused it around 20 minutes in, and I was like, so far so good. Like I've got no problem so far. Like it still is like a bit, it's a bit light. It's a lighter meal than I was hoping for, but like about 20 minutes through, I was like, yeah, this is a good setup. And I kept checking in during the runtime of this movie, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. Things I like, even though I was just kind of dogging it. I like the zooms. I like the iris usage. I like some of that old classical Hollywood style. I think that it is simultaneously what holds the movie back, but it's also the one thing that gives this movie style, which Kicking and Screaming did not really have. And it's something that he comes back to in future films. He uses the iris. He uses zooms. He has sort of that older Hollywood sensibility. He never in his future movies goes this hard in the paint, though. Like this is when he really like goes for it. But I like the way that all works. I like some of the camera work. It's definitely an improvement technically from Kicking and Screaming. There's a scene when Eric Stoltz as Lester and Ramona, they're walking out of the movie theater and they run into her ex. The camera is on Ramona and Lester, and then she sees her ex, and the camera just leaves Lester behind and just follows Ramona. And then eventually they bring him back into the conversation. He just walks over. But I like some of the camera decisions like that. There's a little bit more thought to it in this movie than there was in Kicking and Screaming. And again, that's just improvement. So all that stuff I like. I like the technical elements of this movie because even though it's not wholly original, it's something. He's playing with style. And this is not necessarily the case in Kicking and Screaming. Jack, I want to go back to you because you were lukewarm on this movie. What are the good things about this movie that keep you from being like, this is just a bad movie? Like, what are the things that you find redeeming about it?
I think the performances by all the actors in it are genuinely like really solid performances. We talked about switching the casting. That would be interesting to see. But overall, like, I thought all the performances were good. I think the big picture idea of it all, I enjoy. I think there's a lot you can work with there. And if they did a couple things differently with that, would have been a lot better. And then just a small moment I really like is when the friend then goes to therapy and he's speaking in a British accent. I think that's very funny.
I kind of wish that they leaned more into the farce of this film and went a little bit harder. I just wish that, I think they're like, I think, the bones are there, but they need to like put a little more into it. Agreed.
Yeah, and kind of going on that British accent thing, that was something I really liked in it. And I liked when this movie really went like weird. It was like that one scene in the beginning where Lester was young and they did all these like scenes of him like looking through this girl's like window, like, and like sitting in class and stuff and going through like his whole life when he's little. And then later when it's like Vince like explaining like as Leo, who is Lester, like and that is just funny within itself too. But when he's doing those, it goes back into those flashbacks and it's Vince as like a young Lester instead. I thought like stuff like that really hit. And that's like also the British accent and stuff. It's like when this film goes like full like farce, like we were saying, like I think it really lands. And that's even with the whole idea of the conceit of the film is like just this guy is super jealous and it stems from like his first relationships. And like I thought the first like 10 minutes were really strong because I'm like, oh, like this is that. And then as soon as you get into Lester a bit more, like I know this is good stuff, but I think it connects to everything. As soon as you get into Lester a little more, like he becomes like a grounded character. So I think this film would have really worked if it leaned more into that weird stuff that they did. And that's why
I think it just all needed to be played up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like they needed to like turn the dial up on it all.
Yeah. This whole like premise it feels very commedia dell'arte to me. You know, it feels like, that sounds like a commedia. That sounds like a commedia archetype, right? Like the jealous husband, he's like chasing the lovers around or whatever. Like that sounds like farce to me. And I do wish it went further in that direction because when this movie gets playful, it's really playful. The zooms and the irises are fun and playful. I think even though the use of narration is like, it's okay for me, but it, like you said, Jack, it is generally sort of a lazy choice, or at the very least, not very inspired. But I will say, speaking of things that are playful, Noah Baumbach is doing the narration throughout this film. And there's a scene when he also cameos in the movie. So there's a Noah Baumbach cameo during one of his narrations, which is just like funny to me. I think that's the kind of stuff that like tickles me a little bit as a filmmaker. Because like he is narrating and then it cuts to his character talking in a cameo, and then it cuts back to the narration, and it's clearly the same voice. It's just kind of silly. You mentioned the British accent for Vince. I think Carlos Jacot's really good in this movie. I think he's very good in Kicking and Screaming, and he's very good in this. Unfortunately, this is the last time, in a meaningful way, in a feature film, Mr. Jealousy and Highball, that is, that Noah Baumbach would work with Carlos Jacot, Chris Eichman, Eric Stoltz, and the DP of all of these movies, Steven Bernstein. So this is sort of the last hurrah for that core group in this early set of Baumbach films, which is a shame because I really like Carlos Jacot and I really like Chris Eichman. I think that they're both good in this movie. but especially Carlos Chacon. I think he kind of gets what the movie is more than anyone else. I think he understands like when to play it up and when to be super silly.
Yeah, he's very over the top throughout this whole film, and again, it really works with it. And well, I didn't know that. It's sad that he's not in more Baumbach.
Yeah, it kind of is a bummer, and I think that's again, you know, when we're separating these films, like this stretch here is early Baumbach, and he, like I said, he has an idea of himself as a filmmaker, which he completely sheds, because after Mr. Jealousy and Highball, his next movie is The Squid and the Whale, which is Oscar nominated for Best Original Screenplay. And it's completely different than these. These are like screwball farcical comedies and sort of like coming of age stories. And then The Squid and the Whale is like real sour. It's real personal. It's about his parents getting divorced in the 1980s. And like, and in order to get there, he has to abandon all of these people. But while we have them, I think that they're really fun. I think everyone in the movie is good. Like you said, Jack, I think Annabella Sciorra is really good as Ramona. Eric Stoltz, Chris Eichman, Carlos Chacon, Marianne Jean-Baptiste, John Lear, Peter Bogdanovich. Everyone that's in the movie is very good. Where do you guys want to take it before we move to Highball? I know we're not done with Mr. Jealousy yet, but what direction do you guys want to take it?
When you were saying The Squid and the Whale is like a personal film, I feel like all of his films are very personal. And I feel like with this in his early stage, like you say they're coming of age stories and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, I think Baumbach was coming to age like during this time. And like, I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it, but like you can feel like how he's felt like Lester throughout this, and like him being the narrator, like also connects to that in a weird way.
And going back to that Roger Ebert quote too, you know, the thing that he says about how Noah Baumbach's characters are too old for college, but unready for life. I think that's Noah Baumbach too. If college is The Squid and the Whale and Marriage Story, you know, he's not there. He's doing Kicking and Screaming. He's doing Mr. Jealousy and Highball. There is definitely that personal element to these films. I have one more like avenue that I don't think we've quite scratched, and that is the central romance between Lester and Ramona. I think that Baumbach is, as I already mentioned, he's a very romantic filmmaker. I think he just gets relationships. I think he understands them, and I think he writes them really well. There's some stuff in here that I think is beautiful. I think their little whistle bit throughout the movie is really sweet, and it's always played kind of in stark contrast to some of the upbeat nature of the rest of the movie. Whenever they do their whistling bit, it really slows down. It cuts into a close-up of both of the characters. Just one of those like sweet small details that make me buy the relationship, because without those moments, it is very much just Lester being completely insane and neurotic. And it's like, why does she even like him? Yeah. Well, it's because of those tender moments, you know, like those tender moments really work. And I think that all comes to a head at the end of the movie. You know, the big come together scene I'd like to talk about in a moment, like when the plots all converge on each other. But I think that the wedding, again, is just some of Baumbach's like best romantic filmmaking. I think it's warm.
Yeah, I thought, you know, the wedding scene at the end was a nice little way to wrap up their story. In that moment at the end where they both like know it's not going to work, like deep down inside, but they're still like, maybe it will. I thought that was, I just enjoyed that, because that's how it be sometimes.
I mean, that's what Jack just described is like always the best, I think, ending for like a relationship that's so up and down and all around. But like, I mean, it's similar to the ending of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's just like, yeah, but like this sucked, but like what if maybe, and then it just ends. And like that's,
but what if it didn't suck?
What if it didn't suck, like it kind of didn't at one point in our lives.
It's like that reference for Dan here in Game of Zones.
Yes.
When Daryl Morey's talking to James Harden and it's like, shoot 300 threes, and James like, but what if I miss them all? And Daryl's like, but James, what if you make them? It's like that.
Game of Zones is awesome. Shout out to Game of Zones.
Shout out to Game of Zones.
Rest in peace.
But yeah, and the thing I think we've been talking about this whole time is like, I think the structure is there. I think if you pitch this to someone, you'd be like, oh yeah, like definitely. But I don't think it sticks the landing when like it's put onto paper and it's not like fully realized. And I think like that's okay for something in your early work, because I think a lot of early filmmaking is just figuring it out also. And then once you figure that out, you can figure out the writing afterwards. But I think it's almost there. But overall, I definitely enjoyed like Mr. Jealousy, and I think it has some interesting seeds that just don't fully blossom at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk about that big come together at the end of the movie as well, because I think that is sort of the tone and pace, not just story wise, but also like filmically, that I really was hoping that the rest of this movie would be. There's one shot. It's after Chris Agnew punches Eric Stoltz in the face and he starts to walk away and the camera just tracks with him, and then he stops and then he turns around and the camera tracks back. And there's like the drums, kind of like the Fargo drums, Tyler. Yeah. And like, it's just, that's the energy that I kind of wanted throughout this whole movie. Everybody's like talking over each other, which is something he does so well in so many of his future films, is characters just sort of talking over each other. Everyone's talking over each other. Everyone's trying to figure out. Chris Agnon's like, wait, Ramona? And then Ramona's like, you were lying to me, to Lester. And then there's the situation with Vince and his wife. All of it's becoming intertwined. And like, that's like the really fun farce stuff. And
also just the whole, this is like so farce. I really enjoyed this part, and we haven't touched on it yet. When Lester tells Ramona about his therapy address, he mixes up the numbers, but then later in the movie she mixes up the numbers and then gets the right address, and that's just really funny, and I don't think those jokes could work anymore nowadays because everyone just has notes on their phone.
You'll just Google Maps it.
Or you'll just Google Maps it, and be like, oh, this is a chicken place. This isn't a therapy place.
Also, just like Kicking and Screaming, there's a lot of just great lines, and also very insightful while being kind of funny. There's that one scene where they're at the diner, Lester and Vince, and I think Lint is there as well. He's talking about the book, and Vince asks him, oh, have you read it? And he says, well, I haven't read it, but I know what it is. And that's a very small thing. Like, it's very much not even worth talking about in the podcast because we only have so much time to talk about an entire movie. But like, those are the insightful little lines that really separate Noah Baumbach from others, and also what make me really fall in love with him as a filmmaker. That line is just so smart because it's not just in the context of this movie. It's also like, that is itself commentary on like so many people, who I used to be as well. I would just like trash movies that I had not seen.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I know what it is. I know what Transformers is, so I don't have to see it in order to be mean about it, Mm-hmm. And then there's also silly, weird lines that are just so absurdly strange. Like when he's in therapy and he says like, I think Coke does vary per can. Like that shouldn't make me laugh as much as it does. But just the idea that someone spends their time thinking about how Coke varies by can, like the amount of milliliters in each can is different. Do you guys have any final thoughts on Mr. Jealousy as a movie before we talk about Highball? Because again, we can't talk about Mr. Jealousy without talking about Highball.
The base of the recipe is there, but it needs a little bit of tweaking. You need to change a couple ingredients. You need to add a little more seasoning in some spots. But I think, the concept is good.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about Highball.
Okay, Daniel, when we get, you got to tell me what is Highball? I was like 45 minutes in. And I was like, what is happening? Who is this? Why does the lighting look like worse than my lighting that I've...
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's so many questions I have about Highball. Because Mr. Jealousy is, like, shot, like, well. And I'm like, all right, I knew Highball wasn't going to be, shot as well. But I was just shocked.
I'm glad you asked, Tyler. Let me tell you what Highball is. Okay, so for those of you listening at home, Highball is a movie, sort of, that Noah Baumbach and most of the cast and crew of Mr. Jealousy made right after finishing the filming of Mr. Jealousy. So they had a little bit of leftover money. At least this is how the legend goes. They had a little bit of leftover money. They came in under budget for Mr. Jealousy, so they had a little bit of extra money. I think they had extra film stock. They still had some of the equipment. And they decided that they wanted to keep hanging out together, basically. Like, they all had a really great time working together. They all really enjoyed working together, and they decided, why don't we just shoot another movie in 6 days?
Yeah.
And again, that's a really admirable idea. And just like, that's something that when you're hanging out with friends late at night, you think is a good idea. And then once you actually get there, it's not. Highball, the plot is basically we've got these two characters that are having a dinner party, and then they have that dinner party with their friends. They all come over. Doesn't go great. And then they have a Halloween party, and their friends all come over, and it doesn't go super great. And then they have a New Year's Eve party, and it doesn't go super great. So it's basically just a series of dinner parties with a group of silly friends. And that's pretty much the extent of the plot. It's just these characters hanging out in an apartment. And again, they shot it in 6 days. They shot it with basically no money. They shot it with limited crew, and they shot it with limited equipment. And the movie itself, actually, I'll just read a quote from Noah Baumbach. He says it even better than I could possibly say it. Noah Baumbach has addressed Highball. Not many reporters dare to ask him because he's basically disowned this movie. Depending on the version that you watch, it's actually credited to a different director and writer. He took his name off of the film. Although in the version I watched, the name was back on. So
Same.
Noah Baumbach is not a fan of this movie. And here's what he had to say about it. He said that the truth is I never owned Highball. It was really an experiment, and kind of a foolish experiment, because I didn't think about what the ramifications would be if it did not work. But it was made with all the best intentions, which was to try and make a movie in 6 days and use all the same people from Mr. Jealousy with all of their goodwill and bring in some more people as well. And it was a funny script, but it was just too ambitious. We didn't have enough time. We didn't finish it. It didn't look good. It was just a whole mess. We couldn't get it done, and I had a falling out with the producer. He abandoned it, and I had no money to finish it. Then later, it was put out on DVD without my approval. So this movie should not exist, basically. It's a failed experiment by Noah Baumbach that ended up circulating. And so because of that, we're not actually going to rank this in the Noah Baumbach rankings once we get there. But I thought it was important to talk about because it's so flippin' weird. And I think it's, again, illuminating of the career of Noah Baumbach. So you can yell at me for making you do this. You can yell at me. Go ahead. But I'm glad that we watched this together. I want to hear what you guys thought about this movie.
Oh, I got a lot of respect for the homies that made this.
Hell yeah.
It doesn't look good. It's, I actually think the general idea of it is really good. It just doesn't come together because they made it in 6 days. What I will say, the greatest redeeming quality that this movie has is that magician scene. That was objectively hilarious. I loved every second of that scene. And for that reason, I'm putting it above Mr. Jealousy in the rankings.
Wow.
Unofficial.
Well, unofficially.
There's no magician scene in that.
That is true.
Whoever that magician was, killed it. Hilarious.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
There's no dinosaur costumes in Mr. Jealousy either.
I was about to say the dinosaur costumes were pretty awesome. But again, I don't know. Jack kind of summed it up perfectly. I mean, it's one of the worst lit movies I've ever seen by like a reputable director. I will say this, there is some sort of endearing quality about it. Like even before you told me all of that, Dan, I was like, this is made with the best intentions. It's not like...
Right.
It's not like... It doesn't feel like someone's like, fuck you. Like I can't think of a movie that like actively like hates the audience off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a movie that just actively hates the audience.
Space Jam 2?
Yeah, like something like
Space Jam
that. Like where there's extras in the background that are just dressed up in Halloween costumes and they're just there to make people go, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of something." But also the movie, again, it's not a real movie. You can't, like, I can call it meandering and like poorly shot and like clearly done on a set. Like I can say all this shit, but it doesn't matter because again, this was just, if we had extra money lying around and it's like, let's just all hang out with our friends from the script that I just wrote. It's endearing, as I say.
Yeah, the movie was co-written by Noah Baumbach and Carlos Chacot. And there's one other writer whose name I completely left off of my notes, and I apologize. I will crudely insert it now. Christopher Reed. Great. The first time I watched it, and yes, this is the second time I've watched it. The first time I was bewildered and confused, and I didn't understand what was happening, much like you, Tyler. Now, I got to tell you something. The second time I watched this movie, I kind of had a blast with it, and I think I have every intention of purchasing this movie and watching it again in the future. There's a lot to like about this, okay? And I did some research. There's kind of a growing cult about Highball. There's not a ton of information about it on the internet, but there are some think pieces, some articles, and some reputable sources talking about this movie. And there's like a growing appreciation and love of this movie. There's a lot that is funny about it. It's just, you can't look at it as a movie. You have to look at it as something that your friends made, last weekend. And I think when you start to look at it like that, there is, like you said, Jack, there's the magician thing in the first portion. There's a lot of like funny lines. There's a lot of funny dynamics and moments throughout this movie. So let's talk about them, because like there's no reason to like bash it. We don't hate this movie. It was made with best intentions. So let's just talk about the fun stuff. Like, let's talk about some of the good stuff. Let me break it down in thirds. So first, we have the birthday party portion. There's one moment in the birthday party scene where someone says, because Noah Baumbach's character has just gone through a divorce, they say, "Where is Margaret? We never see her anymore." And then Noah screams, "Maybe that's because we got divorced, you fucking idiot." Just funny. Just funny. Just good. Just classic comedy.
The idea that, he's sponsoring a kid in like Venezuela or whatever.
Very funny.
So
for
good.
like 80 cents a month.
Because his explanation is that he's fallen on hard times. Margaret and he went through a divorce, and so he can't afford this other kid. And so he had to stop. They took the kid away from him. Yeah. And like Carlos Chakot's character keeps making fun of him throughout this movie for that. And that's like really funny.
At the end, he's given a check for like $12,000 to give to the kid. And he's like, it would make him too rich.
It would make him too rich. He would be a king to them. There's a lot that's going on there that I think is really funny. And so he's in this movie. Carlos Chakot's in this movie. I think Carlos Chakot's really good in this again. Mm-hmm. This is not the last time that they would work together. They would make a short film after this, but this is like the last like lengthy piece that they would work on together. And I think as sort of a weird swan song, it's like really good, because I think Carlos Chakot gets to flex a different muscle than he was able to in the first two movies that they worked on.
Totally.
Kicking and Screaming and Mr. Jealousy, he's playing sort of a very nervous character, very soft. But in this movie, he gets to play like the dick, like he gets to be an asshole. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's really good at it. Like he's constantly just like edging people and poking at people and bothering people. And he's very good at it. And then they subvert that in the third act when he comes back from like a mental institution and he's just like completely despondent, which again ends with a really funny scene where he's singing Beautiful Dreamer, just like horrifically. And so he's really good in this movie. I think everyone that's in the movie is like serviceably very funny.
And I think that's why the movie never feels like, again, it does feel confusing and like what is going on at first, but the thing is, it never feels like they're like saying fuck you, and I think that's like the best part of the film is it's just like, oh, these are just a bunch of friends making a movie, and that's just fine.
Which third of the film Highball do you like more? Do you like the dinner party, the Halloween party, or the New Year's Eve party more?
I like the Halloween part. I just like Halloween in general, so I think there's just a lot of good bits in that, and I think the dinosaur thing really killed me too. Just like two people dressed as the same dinosaur, and someone opens up to one of the dinosaurs. It's like, wrong. I think you're talking to the wrong dinosaur, and that's just classic comedy right there.
The first third has the magician scene, so it's got to be the best third. Okay. Although there is this weird thing in the last third where all of a sudden they're all like, yeah, this guy's gay.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah. That's where, and I recently watched or rewatched The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, which is a movie that Tyler, you and I love. We just love that movie.
That movie's so good.
There's like some gay humor in that as well. And Noah Baumbach co-wrote that movie as well. And so like this is stuff that I'm sure he would like to leave in the past, but definitely doesn't age well. The idea of like outing, they out Eric Stoltz's character and they sort of play that for, or not sort of, but they play that for comedy, which isn't great, and there's also some stuff about like the kid in Venezuela that doesn't age very well. So there's a little bit of off-color humor in this film that is not great, but I think that, excluding those moments, I think a lot of the humor does really work for me. I think, Tyler, I'm with you. I think that the Halloween section is my personal favorite. One of the reasons, not only the lizards or the two dinosaurs, but also Peter Bogdanovich again shows up to just hang out with his son, Noah Baumbach. And he's doing something that I really identify with. He, throughout this entire movie, is just doing impressions of actors, characters in movies.
Right.
He doesn't do anything else. He just does impressions. And there's one scene when he's talking to a woman and he starts doing an impression. He's like, "Oh, Harvey, you see my bunny rabbit over here."
Yeah, right.
And then she's like, "I don't know what you're doing and it's not funny, so stop doing it." And he just keeps doing it and it gets progressively more awkward. And I just really identify with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's that going on in the Halloween thing. I think there's also Carlos Ducat like tricks the kid into drinking some liquor and then he pukes and then he's like, "Yo, this kid just puked," which is good.
It reeks.
Yeah, it reeks. Get out of here, kid. There's funny stuff in this movie, and I would watch if somebody just uploaded a bunch of clips on YouTube. I would revisit those clips pretty often because I think if you just look at this movie as like a series of clips or as like a series of short sketches, works really well.
All right, I think it's time for the Noah Baumbach
The Noah Baumbach
White.
Roger. Okay. Here we are, Noah Baumbach rankings. Now, as I already mentioned, we are not going to be ranking Highball.
Can I make a bold
We are
prediction?
Go for it.
I think all three of us are going to have a different list after this one.
Like after this week or like including this week?
No, this week. This one.
Okay.
That is my prediction.
I can't wait. I'm very excited. But we're not going to be ranking Highball because Noah Baumbach did not intend this to be seen by the public. And it was out there and he never had any ownership over it. So this is technically not a Noah Baumbach movie. He disowned it. I'm sure he could have a laugh about it now, but this is not something that he wanted out in the world. And
Did he get any of my $1.99 from Amazon?
Probably not. He probably didn't make any money off of this. So because of that, I don't want to rank it because I don't want to make it a part of the canon, so to speak. But I do think it's important to talk about. We are only going to be ranking Mr. Jealousy. We've watched 3 movies now. Well, we've watched 4, but we're ranking 3. We have Frances Ha. We have Kicking and Screaming. We have Mr. Jealousy. Tyler, we'll start with you. Give me your rankings.
At the bottom of the list. And I think this is going to surprise you, is Kicking and Screaming.
Wow.
Interesting.
That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
I think I actually like Mr. Jealousy a little more, which brings me to the second one, which is Mr. Jealousy. And then number 1 is still Frances Ha, of course.
Wow.
That's what I knew about myself. So I knew it was going to be different than everyone else's. And I know you two are already different. So it's like,
But what if I had a change of heart?
yeah, and you like Frances Ha more. Well, let's see, Jack.
Yeah,
what are
what
you
if?
at? What's
What
yours,
if?
huh?
Okay, well, for mine, number 3, Mr. Jealousy. Number 2, Frances Ha.
So you didn't have a change of heart.
Never change. That's what my daddy
Okay,
always used
sweet.
to tell me. And number 1, Kicking and Screaming.
Oh,
Incredible.
shit. Okay.
Just like you predicted, I have Mr. Jealousy 3rd. I have Kicking and Screaming 2nd, and I have Frances Ha at number 1. Cue music. Boo, 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 boo. Now we're out of the Baumbach rankings, and we're just talking about the movie.
I won.
I have a few closing thoughts that I just want to end on. I think I want to talk just very specifically about Baumbach because I think we've said everything that we've had to say about the movies. First, let me just ask, have either of you seen The Squid and the Whale yet?
No.
I've started it, but I haven't finished it.
That will be the next movie that we will be watching. So everyone listening, please do watch along with us. That will be our next film. Again, The Squid and the Whale, Oscar nominated for best original screenplay. It's a movie I really like. As a matter of fact, I'd say I really love The Squid and the Whale. And I'm very interested to see what you guys think about it because it is very sour. But before we get there, I just want to say this is a very interesting moment in Noah Baumbach's career. He makes Mr. Jealousy in 1997. It comes out early 1998. He doesn't make a movie until 2005. He co-writes The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, with Wes Anderson, which comes out in 2004. But it's not until 2005 that he actually gets his next film into theaters. I think that that's very interesting because, you know, Kicking and Screaming is much celebrated. It gives him enough credit to make another movie, which is kind of all you can ask for as a filmmaker, is just enough credit to make one more. And then he comes out with Mr. Jealousy, and it's not as well received as Kicking and Screaming was. So in terms of like industry talk, he's technically at this point on a downward trajectory. And then he kind of compounds that by doing Highball, which is just kind of a complete disaster. It doesn't like really have a huge effect on him, I don't think, because I don't think anyone really saw it. He decides that he doesn't want to make these kind of films. And And instead he wants to dive into the more personal. And he does that with The Squid and the Whale. And then he has a weird middle period that we'll get to, which will be very exciting. But The Squid and the Whale very much is where he becomes Noah Baumbach. And without The Squid and the Whale, I don't think that he, frankly, has a career. I don't think we're talking about him. I don't think he ends up making Marriage Story or the Meyerowitz stories or Francis Ha or any of the films that I really love of his. So it's at this point where he's sort of unable to do much of anything. From there, he digs really deep and he pulls something out of his heart, out of his stomach. But I just wanted to just mention that because I think this is a huge crossroads moment in the career of Noah Baumbach. And I think it should be noted as such as we talk about these movies going forward, because there is early Baumbach and then there's The Squid and the Whale, and he's off to the races after that.
What a nice little ribbon to put on the end of this lovely podcast.
Good job, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
You did good, kid.
You did good.
You're a good kid.
Yay, I think you guys
He's
did
a good
too.
kid.
Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you listening to this podcast and watching along with us. If you do, we know not many of you are, but that's okay, because the ones that are with us, we love you, and that's okay. We're not resentful. We don't do this for anyone else. We just like to talk about movies. We like to talk about filmmakers. We like to talk about craft. We like to talk about all the good stuff. Really enjoy doing this, and so for those of you who are listening, we really appreciate that you're going on this journey with us. I've been Daniel.
I've been Jack.
And I've been Tyler.
And I think Coke does vary per can. Thank you for listening.